All right. Well, I will try to keep my old man jokes to a minimum, but that might be really hard to do. But since it's being recorded, I guess I better show some respect. Um, well, today, Lord willing, I think we're going to uh, go into some deeper waters here. And I want to introduce a couple of things to you that it might be new for some of you as far as regarding some English concepts, but I think it'll be helpful. Hopefully, I'm hoping it is. But I'm reminded, Paul said, of course, in 2 Timothy 2:15, we talk about this verse a lot, to be diligent to show ourselves approved, handling accurately the word of truth, and as a workman that does not need to be ashamed. But that term, handling accurately, I'm sure you've heard of the well-known illustration. That word sort of comes from this idea of cutting straight, in Paul's line of work as a tent maker, and the importance of precision. Because if you don't, if any of you have ever made anything with fabric, you know that if you don't cut things correctly, when you try to bring it together to sew it's a problem. It doesn't work out. So I think that word accurately or with precision is a very important word for us. And this is why, I've gone into a lot of these details with various aspects of grammar, because the better you understand the language that you're working with, the better the more accurate and precise you're going to be in what you say. And again, we know that Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic were the languages that were originally written in. The scriptures were, but I think our effort in precision in dealing with our English translations will carry over into the efforts we make, even as we use interlinear and things like that, to try to better understand the original. And a lot of the concepts and principles that we find in English grammar are very similar in Greek as well. I was affirming that today as I was studying a particular concept that we might get to today. And I was looking in my Greek grammar books, and they were talking about there's a lot of overlap between the Greek and English on that. So that being said, last week we sort of re-engaged with our discussion of grammar, and we've been looking at the connector words. Of course, we'd seen the conjunctions, the prepositions, and as we were focused on the prepositions, there are a couple of other categories, grammatical parts of speech where prepositions are used, but they're not used as a prepositional phrase. They're used differently. And so I thought it might be helpful to bring those things up, because as you go through the English text, you're going to encounter these, and I don't want you to be confused about them, because not every time a preposition is used in Scripture, not every time is it used for a prepositional phrase. And there are other parts of speech in which prepositions find themselves. And the one that we looked at last week was infinitives, right? Infinitives, which is essentially, and I really should change this to, whenever you have the word to, T-O, when it's connected to a noun, then it's a prepositional phrase. It's linking that noun to some other word in the sentence. But when you have the word to plus a verb, things are different now. That's known as an infinitive, and I actually don't know where that word infinitive came from, but it's called an infinitive, and in a sense, it is a linking. There's a link there as well, but in this case, it's a verb being linked to another word in the sentence. All right. And so last week we spent some time, we looked at some examples of infinitives. So let me just refresh your memory, and maybe those of you who are here, in each of these cases, we talked about there were 3 ways that an infinitive functions. There's 3 ways grammatically that it functions. All right. And let me just use some of these examples to review and remind us of that. So I'll just ask, first I'm going to ask Tabs, since he's our seminary scholar among us. I'm going to ask him to identify this first sentence here. Just tell us what the infinitive is and how is it functioning in the sentence. And by functioning, I mean, is it functioning like a noun or an adjective or a verb, an adverb? What's it doing in the sentence? So Tabs?
Okay, Master. I'm awake. Okay.
All right, good. That's helpful.
Okay. The infinitive, Pastor, is to walk.
All right.
Because the word to is linked to a verb.
Yes.
And then the sentence is I tried to walk. The subject is I. And then the verb is tried. And then the to walk functions as it describes the action, so it's functioning as an adverb.
Okay. As an adverb, how would it be functioning? Let's see. Let me do this.
Oh wait, is it functioning as? No, I think so. Because if the action is he tried to walk, it's describing, it's telling us what he tried to do.
Okay. If it's telling us what he tried to do, then to walk is in a sense, the recipient of the action.
It becomes the object, Pastor?
It's the object,
It's the
yes.
object of the sentence. Okay.
Yeah, the object is to walk. Okay. So it's not an adverb in this case. It's actually functioning like a noun.
An adjective, a noun.
A noun, remember?
Yes,
A noun, because a noun is a subject or an object. So you can think of it this way. Like if I had said, I tried a bite, right? Clearly a bite is a noun. It's the object of I tried. In this case, the object of I tried is to walk. Now I know these infinitives will take some time to get used to, because you see the verb and you think, okay, this is an action of some kind, or it's got to be connected to a verb then. Well, not necessarily. Infinitives can act like nouns. I think I gave another example. I could say to walk is my favorite exercise. All right. Now here, to walk is functioning as the subject. Okay. It is what is being described. The verb that's a verb of being. And then exercise is in this case, we call it the predicate noun. It's describing to walk. All right. So here to walk is a subject. And again, that means it's functioning like a noun because subjects are nouns. All right. Now, why does this matter? Well, for one thing, and this helps with diagramming, when you have a noun, remember, nouns do not modify. Okay? Nouns do not modify other words.
No.
So when you're diagramming, you're not going to have one noun modify another noun. Okay, that would be violating the rules of grammar. Adjectives, now adjectives modify, right? Yep. Adjectives do modify, and what do they modify?
Noun.
They modify nouns. Adverbs, they modify
verbs.
They modify verbs, and sometimes other adjectives or adverbs.
Other adjectives. Yeah.
Okay, but normally verbs. Now verbs, they do not modify either. Now verbals modify. Here, let me really make it confusing for you guys. Verbals modify. And again, remember the verbals are participles, gerunds, Sorry, gerunds do not. Participles or infinitives. Those verbals modify because they act like adjectives or adverbs. All right. Prepositional phrases modify. They function like adjectives or adverbs. So they'll modify a noun or a verb. Participles modify. Because again, a participle is not a verb, it's a verbal. All right, it looks like a verb, but it doesn't act like a verb. Now, this is important because when you're diagramming, you need to know what kinds of words modify, what kinds of words do not. If you have a noun, it does not modify. And so infinitives, they are a verbal which can act like a noun. And these are two examples. I tried to walk. It's an object there. To walk is my favorite exercise. It's functioning there like a subject. Or I could use let's say I'm using sort of what do you call this? A figurative expression. If I were to say to walk is to live, right? Same way, speaking poetically. Well, notice here, I've got two infinitives, don't I? I've got the word to followed by a verb. All right. So tabs, how does this first infinitive function in this sentence? To walk.
To walk, I think it's functioning as the subject, Pastor.
Yes, it's the subject. What's my verb?
Is verb of
The
being.
verb is. It's a verb of being. So what is to live? What is that doing?
Live.
It also is an infinitive because the word live verb. To live.
Is it functioning, Pastor, like because it's trying to equate walking to living, so is it describing walk?
Yeah. And
So
remember, go ahead.
is it an adjective, Pastor?
Yeah,
Functioning as an
it's a
adjective?
predicate adjective.
Predicate adjective. Okay.
It's functioning like an adjective here. So these infinitives are tricky little guys. Okay, let's look at a couple of another one. I came here to learn. Jason, why don't you take this one? Just identify where's the infinitive here and what is it doing in this sentence?
The infinitive is to learn.
Okay.
Okay. The subject is I, and then the verb is came. And then the infinitive is functioning as an adverb because it modifies the verb came.
Okay, so to learn modifies came, tells us why I came.
Yeah.
So yes, it's functioning as an adverb.
The purpose.
It's the purpose. I came here to learn. This is why I came. So that's an adverb. It's modifying the verb. Now, again, this is not a prepositional phrase, right? It is an infinitive because of the verb. The learn is a verb here, not a noun. If it were a noun, it'd be a prepositional phrase. Okay, how about this one? I'll stay with you, Jason. Again, what if I changed it to I came here to be taught? Is there any difference here?
Yeah. I think to be taught.
Is that a infinitive still, or is it a prepositional phrase or something else?
It's a prepositional phrase because be taught is functioning as a noun.
So what is this? If I say I taught a class, is taught a verb or a noun?
It's a verb.
Yeah. So to be taught, actually, be taught is a verb.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's why I'm
Hmm.
doing these examples, just so you guys can see some differences. So in this case, if it's a verb, if be taught is a verb, then what do I have here? To be taught then is what?
Infinitive.
Yes. So it's the same. The subject is I, the verb is came, the object is here, and the infinitive, it's an infinitive here, to be taught, and it's an adverb. It's modifying came. All right.
Yeah.
Now, what if I said, I came here to school.
This time, Pastor, it's a prepositional phrase because school is a noun.
Yes. Okay. So now, and here, that would now be modifying here.
Mm-mm.
Which here? School, to school. So, but yeah, in this case,
Mm.
that's a prepositional phrase, which also modifies. Again, remember, prepositional phrases act like adjectives or adverbs, so they too modify. Okay, how about, thanks, Jason. Pastor Renee, let me give this one to you.
Okay.
This sentence here. Just identify the infinitive and then tell me how it's working here in this sentence.
The man to call is at his home. To call is infinitive.
Yeah.
The man
This one's a little tougher.
describing the man.
Yes, it is. Good. So what does that mean? So to call describes the man.
It acts as an adjective.
Yes. Yeah, that means to call is functioning as an adjective. Good. Again, it's an infinitive. So how you would diagram this, you would say the man, which man? The man to call, and then the rest of the sentence would be is at his house. All right. So here we have three examples where an infinitives can function as nouns. That could be as a subject or object. Nouns, adjectives, those that modify, or adverbs. All right. So this is what makes infinitives rather tricky to deal with. Okay. They can function as nouns. And again, remember, nouns do not modify, or they can function as adjectives. Adjectives do modify. They modify a noun, or they can function as an adverb, modifying a verb. All right. Any questions on that? Is that make sense, I hope? Okay. All right. Well, let's look at some passages, and let's do that. We'll just do the same thing. What I want you to do is we'll identify the infinitives in these passages, and then tell me how they function. All right. Now, notice there are several. We can see that word to several places here. So just walk us through each time you see the word to, and just tell us: is this a prepositional phrase, or is it an infinitive? And then we'll talk about if it is an infinitive, okay, how is it functioning in the sentence? All right. So let's see. Pastor Entz, if you're there, let me give you this first passage.
Yes, Pastor. To me, the very least of all saints. So to me,
Yeah, now, is that an infinitive or prepositional phrase?
that's an infinitive, Pastor.
Okay, and what tells us
So
that?
it's a noun.
It's a noun. So if we have two plus a noun, is that an infinitive or a prepositional phrase?
Yeah, prepositional. Sorry.
No, that's no problem.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's prepositional phrase. So we'll move on to the next one.
It's given me to preach.
To preach.
To preach.
All right, how about that one? Is that
The
a
verb.
yeah? Preach is a verb, right?
Yeah. So it's an infinitive.
Okay, it is an infinitive. Now, what is it doing here? Like, how's it functioning?
Preach. Given to preach. It is describing the grace that was given.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's describing the grace, which means it's functioning here at like what? If it's modifying grace, what kind of grace or what grace? Then what would it be? What part of speech?
Adjective.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I think is going on here. Okay. Now, there's one other step in this that we need to do, like we have done with at other times. We need to check interlinear to make sure that it actually is an infinitive in the Greek. Because sometimes infinitives are translated as differently, not as an infinitive, or sometimes there are words translated as an infinitive, which are not. So let me just show you. I pulled up the interlinear. So let's just check real quick on this, make sure. We're in verse 9, I believe, correct? Or verse 8, I'm sorry. So here we go. To me, the very least of all saints was given this grace to the Gentiles. And notice it says here to preach. So let's just look down here. And what does it say? It's an infinitive. All right, so good. That confirms. So we've confirmed that to preach. It's confirmed by interlinear to be an infinitive. And I do this because you don't want to get too far along in your study without confirming these verbs. Remember, I've told you before, we want to use the interlinear to confirm the type of verb that we have, because the translation doesn't always translate it specifically, translate it, correctly. So we want to confirm that. Okay. So that being said, we've confirmed that it is an infinitive. Let's go to the next two. Pastor Entz.
To the Gentiles.
All right. Now, is that an infinitive?
It's a prepositional, I think.
And why?
Because the Gentiles, because of the noun Gentiles.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So it's a prepositional phrase. All right. So we'll just move on then. The next two.
Can't read it so much, Pastor.
Oh, is it blurry?
No, are we?
Pastor, it's still in the interlinear.
I'm still in the interlinear.
Yeah.
Sorry
We're
about
looking
that.
at the We're looking
I
at the
can read
interlinear.
much, Pastor.
All right, here we go. Now can you see it? Oops, did I do the right one here? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. The pattern of the riches of Christ. And to bring,
To bring.
to bring,
All right.
to bring.
How about this one?
Infinitive.
It's an infinitive, right? Because it's to plus the verb.
To light.
Yeah, well, let's first,
Okay.
okay, go ahead. You can do to light. What is to light?
Yeah. To light is a preposition.
Yeah, because light is a noun, correct?
Noun. Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, let's go back to bring and let's ask, okay, what could it be modifying?
The riches. Christ.
There's an important word here, right before, notice the word and, that conjunction. So it's connecting to bring to something else in the sentence. And remember,
To preach.
yes, because remember, and is a coordinating conjunction, which means it connects two words or phrases or clauses which are equal grammatically. Okay, so if to bring is an infinitive, what is it going to connect? What is and going to connect it to? Another what?
Infinitive.
Yeah. So it goes with to preach. So
To
this
preach.
grace was given to preach
Preach to
and
the Gentiles.
yes, to preach and to bring. So two things. So if to preach, it must modify the same thing that to preach modifies. Correct? Because they're connected together by the word and.
Grace.
Yeah, just like we, it describes grace.
Grace.
Yeah. Okay.
I believe. Of course, we could, think about it more and consider some other options. But all right, so the next step is, all right, we want to confirm is to bring actually an infinitive in the Greek text. So let's go back to our good friend, Mr. Interlinear. I'm going to increase the size. And verse 9, and notice here's it's an infinitive. Okay, see that? But there's something different here. Notice it says, and to enlighten all, to enlighten what is the administration of the mystery. What's missing here, if I compare it to the translation? Instead of notice it says, instead of to enlighten, it says to bring to light. The interlinear had this. Interlinear had to enlighten. But notice the New American Standard added a prepositional phrase, to light. You guys see that? In the interlinear, it was just, it just said to enlighten. There was no to bring, there was no to light, there's no, no prepositional phrase. So that was part of their translation or interpretation of the word to enlighten. To enlighten means to bring to light. So just keep that in mind. They added in this prepositional phrase to bring, that was just part of the translation. But in the original Greek, there is no prepositional phrase. It's just this one word that means to enlighten. But in English, you could say that means to bring something to light, to show light upon something. All right, but there is an infinitive there in the Greek, so we confirm that. You need me to go over that again? Does that make sense, guys?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we've got one more two-word, to the rulers here. Pastor Ince.
Yeah.
Is that
Still
a,
preposition.
yeah, it's a prep phrase,
To the ruler.
right? Sorry, to the rulers. Okay. So that's a prep phrase, prepositional phrase. Okay, good. Let's try another one. Pastor Robbie, are you there? You available? Okay, he might be having to do something. Manny, I'm going to ask you to do this one. All right. Not because you're single, but just because you're next on the the line here.
So husbands ought also to love. To love is it's an infinitive.
Yeah, love here is the verb love. So you're right, it's an infinitive. And what's it doing here? What do you think it's modifying? Or is it, how's it functioning, I should ask, sorry.
To love. Husbands also ought to love. It modifies husbands.
Okay, is it describing the husband? That husbands are lovers, or is it telling that something the husband needs to do?
Okay. So it's modifying ought.
Okay, ought. Oops. So let's just break down. Sometimes it helps to sort of see where it goes in the sentence. So we have, so husbands, what's the subject of that sentence?
Subject is husbands.
Husbands, what's the verb?
So husband. Can't find it.
No problem. It's the word ought. Okay. Must might be another is the idea.
So,
Or should.
Should. The word's literally obligated.
Mm.
Are obligated.
So if it modifies a verb, then it should be an adverb.
Yeah. Now, is it modifying it? Is it modifying it, or is it completing the sentence?
It completes the sentence, Pastor Tim.
Yeah, I think it's actually functioning as the object.
Mm.
And like I said, I've repeated this several times. It doesn't feel like it. That doesn't feel right, but that's how it's acting in the sentence grammatically.
Yeah.
It completes the thought. Husbands ought to love, and then their own wives is also part of the object. So technically the object is to love their own wives.
Their own wives, right?
And here's where infinitives are really funky, is that the infinitive here is functioning as the object of the first sentence, but their own wives is the object of the infinitive. The infinitive is also acting like a verb a little bit here.
Right.
So that's what really makes this a little bit confusing. So their own wives is the object of to love, of love. But to love their own wives is the whole thing's the object of husbands ought. Because if you just say husbands ought, it's incomplete. The thought's incomplete. Husbands ought to love. And then specifically to love their own wives in this case. So what we have here is an example of where that infinitive is acting like a noun. So it's not modifying anything, it's the object.
Tim,
Yeah.
is it safe? Could we say safely, as a general rule, that when the infinitive answers the question what, more or less it would be a noun. But if the infinitive answers, at least in the sentence, answers the question why or for what, then it acts more like an adverb.
Yeah,
That's a general principle.
Yeah, I think so. If it answers the question what, then it's probably acting like object in this case. If the infinitive answers the question how or why, then it's going to be an adverb. If the infinitive describes something like what kind, which one, that's going to be an adjective. And they don't function often like adjectives. It's usually a noun or an adverb, but sometimes you'll see it act like an adjective. But that's, in English, it's pretty awkward to do that. In Greek, yeah, I think it's also pretty uncommon. But yeah, I think that's a helpful way to look at it. If it answers a question, what? Husbands ought what? To love. Okay, it's filling that in. Just like in the last one, it was, no, not that one. Oh, it's the next one, sorry. But you can kind of think of it that way. So it's helpful to, like we've done before, when you're trying to figure out how a certain group of words is functioning in a sentence, it's good to just step back. Okay, let me start from the basics. What's the subject here? What's the verb? Okay, now what do I have left? What could it be? All right. Now, if you have an object already, then of something else, then you'll know that the infinitive is not functioning like an object. It's probably functioning in some other way. Let's do some more examples, and maybe by examples we can sort of get used to seeing how they work. So Manny, where's the next two?
Verse 31.
Okay.
To his wife.
All right. Is that a prepositional phrase or an infinitive?
It's a prepositional phrase, Pastor Tim.
Yes. Very good. So to his wife, it's a prepositional phrase because wife is a noun. All right. So where's the next?
Next two is verse 33. To love.
Okay, to love. Oh, we skipped one. To Christ.
The Christ is a prepositional phrase.
Yep. Okay, good.
Verse
Christ
33.
is a noun. Now we have to love in verse 33. How about that one? Is that a prepositional phrase or?
It's an infinitive.
Yes. All right. Just like before, right? We had to love in the up here. Now here, how is it functioning? In verse 33.
Let me identify first. The subject is each individual. The verb is.
So each individual, so individual is to love, right? That's the, if I were to break it down, individual subject is to love.
To love.
So what does that look like there?
It looks like an adverb.
Okay. Is it modifying is? Because remember, what is is? Is a verb of being, right?
Yes, Pastor
So that
Tim.
means that individual is, this is kind of a difficult one. Because normally is acts like a verb of being, and therefore then you would say, well, then to love must be some either a predicate adjective or predicate noun, right? Because you have subject, then verb of being is, and then predicate adjective or noun. That's the normal structure. But it doesn't seem like it's doing that here, does it? Each individual is to love.
If it is not modifying is, so it's modifying the subject.
Well, is he saying, is he describing individuals as lover, as a person, a lover? Let's see if the interlinear will help us out here. This is a complicated one. So we're at this is Ephesians 5, right? Sometimes when you get stuck, the interlinear is a helpful. Okay, so here is chapter 5, and it's down in verse 33, right? 33. Okay. So there's a each individual so let love as himself. Do we see it? Let's see. So here's the verb love. And in the translation, it was translated as is to love. So it was translated as an infinitive. Let's see. Is it an infinitive?
No, Pastor Tim.
No. What is it there? Can you see the?
It reads verb present imperative active.
Yeah, it's not an infinitive in the Greek. It's an imperative.
Imperative mood.
So if we go back to the text, it should have been, I think a better translation here would be, instead of is to love, it should have said, let him love. Let him love his own wife. It's a command. So there's no infinitive here. It actually is a command that each individual let him love his own wife.
Which is how the ESV translates.
Oh, is it? I didn't check.
Yeah.
What's the ESV say?
Let each one of you love his wife as himself.
There you go. Now, why the New American Standard did this, I'm not sure, because it's a pretty straightforward. All it did was confuse things, right? Poor Manny's sitting there going, I don't know. What's it modifying here? This is hurting me. I'm not sure. Well, they made it more complicated than it needed to be, because it simply is, there you go. Yeah. Nevertheless, each individual among you is to love his own wife. That's the New American Standard. So the ESV
New
has.
King James too. New King James also.
Let each of you love his wife as himself. So that's a command. Let love. The New King James. It's also,
It's the
I'm
same,
showing here.
basically.
Let each of you so love his own wife. That's softens it a little, but it's still a command. The New International says, each one of you must love. There you go. I like that one.
There you go.
That's what he's saying. Is to love in English sort of sounds like a command, but it's really, you don't use the word is to convey a command here, because that's usually a verb of being. It's describing the state or condition of something. So that was a poorly chosen, in my opinion, a poorly chosen translation. I think the ESV or the NIV in this case is the one that I think wins the point, because hopefully you guys can, let me make this a little bigger. You guys see that there? Each one of you must love his wife. So this is where, looking at other translations, looking at the interlinear will help you. And I've told you before, right? When you do your diagram, do the diagram in your, the translation you use, but you've got to look at other translations, or especially the interlinear, to make sure that you're diagramming the right thing, that there's nothing like this. This is a difference. You're going to be stuck here for a while trying to figure out what is he saying here. But when you look at, I see the ESV, the NIV, the New King James. What does the Net Bible do? Each one of you must also love his own wife. Okay, so the New American Standard is the only one to put this infinitive in here and mess things up for us. I still love the New American Standard. It's my favorite. But it's got it, like I said, not perfect. And that's why you want to confirm now. I mean, you guys are at a level now where you can, you should know that you're going to have to check your translations to make sure, what the case is. So when we look at the translations, we see, it's an imperative. That makes it simple. Each individual, must love, or let each individual love. Okay. That makes it straightforward. Manny, how's that? That make you feel better?
Thank you, Pastor Tim.
Yeah, that's a tough one. The way it's translated is tough.
So Tim, if I could ask a question, so as we're going through the process, so let's say I'm using NAS, and so I'm diagramming this now. Okay, so I would diagram this based on the NAS, and then I look at the other translations and see that this is not an infinitive. What does that do to my diagram?
Well, here, let's do that.
Point in the process.
So nevertheless, let me go back to my thing here. Yeah, this is what would happen. This is what I do, because if I don't diagram in the Greek, I usually I'll just pick up the New American Standard. I do my quick diagramming that way. So each individual among you, which individuals? The one among you.
Mm-mm.
I'll just put also in with that because I'll put also with the verb. Just keep it together. So also is to love. I would look at it as, oh, this looks like it's the subject is individual, is the verb, and to love is, I
Okay.
put it in the position of an object, or in this case, it wouldn't be an object. Technically, it would be some sort of predicate adjective. And then love, his own wife, is the object of the infinitive. How is he to love? And here's where love acts like a verb again. Love even as himself. And then, and that's my second. It's the second statement. The wife. And here's what's funny. Look at this. Must see to it. That sounds more like a command. But here's that see to it. We're getting a hint here of another part of speech that you probably aren't familiar with, some of you, called a prepositional verb. This is coming. But for now, we're going to leave see to it that she respects her husband. Would be the rest of. So this is what my diagram would look like in regards to that love. Now, if I get the ESV, let me just copy the ESV over here. All right. However, let each one of you, technically be this, each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. So in this case, here, it's a love would just be the verb of the sentence, the sentence here. Let each one love. And here it's let each individual is. Oh, nuts. Now, at the end of the day, when you are teaching this passage, you're going to probably end up saying the same thing, right?
You're right.
Both of these translations will lead you to the interpretation of men,
a command.
Love your wives. Ladies, respect your husbands. So in this case, I don't think the difference in translation will lead you to a wrong interpretation.
Yeah,
it's just how you get there and how you see the words relate is going to be, it's more complicated with this version. But notice we've got two basic commands, one to men, one to the wives, and then we can see the nature of it is a command there. But in the ESV, it's a better translation because notice let love and let respect. Or let's see that she respects. So those are more balanced or more parallel in the better translation. Sometimes in English, when someone says, you are to be dignified, that's sort of a way to say be dignified. That's a roundabout way
dignified
to make a command.
Right.
So she is to be pure. Really saying, it's a command saying be pure. Let her be pure. But I think it's an inconsistent use in the language because are and is are verbs of being. Those normally state a condition or a state. And to use them as an active verb, like or a transitive verb as a command, it's just not consistent. So, but the New American Standard is a little bit older, right? It was translated originally back in the early 70s. And so I wonder if, some of that, English language from 50 years ago is sort of an issue here. This is the 95 update, but they still retained a lot of the original. Okay, that's a lot of detail. I don't know if some of you are probably getting ready to fall asleep here, but any questions? Yeah, Jason's rubbing his eyes like, oh, okay.
Tim.
Yeah.
Yeah, in this situation, in my opinion, I think for verse 33, I think the best translation still is the NIV, at least for verse 33, because it just goes right straight to the point.
I would agree.
Even in the ESV, the word "let" could even mislead us a bit, because it sounds like a verb too, right? So instead of just saying each one of you must love his wife and the wife must respect her husband, so maybe it's just something that we should take note of. But you're right. In the end, we're going to end up with the same conclusion that these translations are really imperatives or contain imperatives.
Yeah, and I think probably, Robbie, what the ESV and the NAS was, or the ESV, sorry, was probably trying to do is remember in English, an imperative, normally imperatives are in the second person, right? Love your wife.
Right.
Okay. That's a second person.
Right.
You. In Greek, though, imperatives can be in the first or third person. And the closest way to translate that, if it was first person, it would be let me love. Because you can't command yourself in English.
Right.
There's nothing that, and if it's third person, let him love. So technically, here, let me get this. So that's first person. And let him love is third person. So technically the NIV, notice it says each one of you must love. So really that's not a fully accurate translation because it's not in the second person. It's in the third person.
Yeah.
So really and it says each one of you love, but the imperative actually is in the third person. Let him love.
Okay.
It's not you love. Here it's more each one of you must love, makes it more the second person. So the NIV, captures the idea, I think, well, but they too don't exactly interpret or translate here. So here the NIV translated as second person, but they translate it as an imperative, which is good. But the ESV translates it as third person.
Yeah, even the NAS, it's a third person.
Yeah. But the problem with the NAS is the NAS translates it as third person, but it translated as an infinitive.
Well, now, what difference would that make in the end interpretation? Whether it's a third person or a second person, because in the English it looks like a second person. Let's say I did not have an interlinear. What difference would it make?
Well, I mean, what do you think? If Paul's giving a command where he says you love your wife, as opposed to saying let each individual or each husband, it's the referent, love his wife.
Okay.
How does that come across?
Yeah. It widens the scope of who should be loving his wife. It's not just the people he's speaking to, but every husband. I guess.
More a principle. Every husband should love his wife. Every
Right.
husband, let every husband love his wife, and it's with an imperative force.
Okay.
So it's slight, and certainly as you go through the text, I mean, you're going to direct it to your hearers, so it probably won't make a difference in your sermon. But technically speaking, yeah, he's saying let each man love his wife, and then he says the wife. He doesn't say you wives. And notice, so the NIV says, notice the NIV for the wife does keep the third person. The wife must respect her husband. But notice here it says, each one of you must love his wife. Well, that's not really how the translation is. It's let each one love his wife.
Right.
So,
Right. So, yeah. So, if I were to preach this based on understanding that it isn't the third person, is it safe for me to say this was being addressed to those who were already believers in the Ephesian church, but the principle applies to all husbands and to all wives, whether they're believers or not, whether they understand this or they know this command or not? Simply
well,
because, yeah, okay.
no, go ahead. I'm sorry. I cut you off.
No, simply because this is a universal principle from God who had instituted marriage. I'm speaking now more in the sermon. So
Yeah. Well, the only thing is, though, he does, and this is in the text, he does refer, he says, let each individual among you.
Among you.
And then he said, or ESV has of you, NIV has of you. So he does include that second person pronoun in the sentence. And so then it's probably by implication would be in the wife, let each wife among you as well. So, I mean, it still is directed to the Ephesians, but yeah, I think he sort of backs off from the more direct, you love your wives too, because he says that up above, right?
Right.
If I remember correctly, doesn't he? Up in up in verse 20, was it 20?
Yes,
25. He does. Husbands, love your wives. So he there is very direct. Here, he's sort of, I think by doing this, he is generalizing it a little bit, because he doesn't just repeat, so husbands, love your wives. But he says, let each man among you love his wife, as opposed to husbands, love your wives. So I don't know. I'd have to think about that. It might be too fine a point, but it is a good question to ask. Why didn't he use the second person here? Why did he use third person and then still throw in the pronoun you? That would be an important question to answer there. Is it because he's taking a more general principle and applying it to them, or is there some other reason? But definitely what should come across is that it is in the form of a command, and certainly it would at least apply to the Ephesians and to Christians. But yeah, one could see, is it more general than that? Is that what Paul is inferring here? That might be something to consider.
What I had done in the past was to give that as a general principle, but then qualify it by saying, since this was addressed to Christian believers, then if you are not in Christ, this would be extremely difficult for you to obey, if not altogether impossible in the long run.
Yeah.
Because this was addressed to believers. So although this is a general principle for everyone and no one is exempt, the fact that you don't have Christ will make this nearly impossible, if not altogether impossible for you. And then, so that's when I would turn it back to the need for Christ.
Yeah. Well, and that's even, if you go back in the text to, let me go back to the passage. if I go back to, this
Mm-mm.
section on wives and husbands is actually a part
right.
of it starts in verse 15.
Right.
Be careful how you walk. Remember, these walk commands or references to walk are key in Ephesians in the application section, right? In chapters 4 to 6.
Right. Mm-mm.
Walk in unity, walk not as the Gentiles, walk in love, walk in the light, and then here, walk in wisdom. And so, how do we walk in wisdom? Well, first he says, why?
Mm.
Because the days are evil. How do we do that? Do not know the Lord's will
Mm.
and be filled by the Spirit.
Mm.
And then from this, be filled by the Spirit, comes all the rest here, all the way through 6:9. So this, what's called the household code, husbands, wives, children, parents, slaves, masters.
Mm.
That section here in Ephesians 5:22 all the way through 6:9 here is it's called the household code, and it is all linked to following be filled by the Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, be filled by the Spirit. I'll show this to you. And then there's these participles that follow. And remember, participles are modifiers.
Right.
Okay, so I think it's the result of being filled by the Spirit.
Mm.
One, it results in speaking to one another in psalms and hymns, spiritual songs. Two, it results in singing. Three, it results in making melody with your heart for the Lord. Four, it results in giving thanks. These are all participles. See that? Speaking, participle. Singing, participle. Making melody, participle. Giving thanks, participle. And notice here, literally being subject, participle. You see that? So it's what? Speaking, singing, making melody, giving thanks, being subject. So 5 participles follow, be filled by the Spirit. This last participle, notice, wives, to your own husbands. So he's linking to verse 21. That be subject here is not in the original text.
That's right. Yeah.
So he's literally saying, and being subject to one another in the fear of Christ. Wives, to your own husbands. All right. And so really, this whole section comes under be filled by the Spirit. How do we do this? How do we love our wives? How do children obey their parents in the Lord? How do fathers raise their children in the fear and admonition of the Lord? How do husbands love their wives? How do slaves obey masters? All of this comes under that umbrella of being filled by the Spirit. It's a fruit of, or it's empowered by, being Spirit-filled, and that's only for believers. So it's not just being a Christian that allows you to do this. It's being a Spirit-filled Christian that empowers you to do this. That's an important distinction, especially if you're counseling couples or families and you go to Ephesians 5. You have to always bring it back to how are they going to do this? If you just give them the commands, you're not helping them. You're putting a weight on them. You need to say, well, how do I obey these commands? Well, starts back in chapter 1, doesn't it? Remembering God's work in our hearts and salvation, but then also the added component here is that these commands are given in the context of being Spirit-filled. So that's an added important component to when you're giving counsel to, let's say, a wife and a husband are struggling in their marriage. Reminding them of who they are in Christ is, first thing you need to know, where are they at with the Lord? Are they saved? Because then you can remind them who they are in Christ. That's the basis for every command as to Christians. And then secondly, are they filled by the Spirit? And by that, I don't mean, are they Christians, right? The Spirit, we become baptized by the Holy Spirit in the church at salvation. We receive the Holy Spirit as the gift that Jesus promised. Here it's being filled by the Spirit. That's a different thing. That's his activity within our lives, not his presence in our lives, his activity.
Yeah.
And that activity results in speaking to one another, psalms and hymns, singing, making melody, giving thanks, being subject to one another. And the way we are subject to one another, Paul shows us in the home. You know, even husbands, as leaders in the home, they still are, in a sense, being subject to their wives by serving their wives, loving them, right? As Christ loved the church. That's an act of humility and submission, really, isn't it? To serve. So, that's something to consider there with, thinking about the overarching context. That's a lot more than you were asking about, Robbie, but
no,
hopefully that.
It's great. I think I kind of missed that one when I taught this once. Sorry, but yeah. Is it safe to say that a hint to this, if I'm using the NAS Bible, is the fact that be subject is not really in the original. So it connects verse 22 to verse 21, and I could safely now assume that the following commands from verse 22 are therefore also connected to all the previous commands which fall under being filled with the Holy Spirit. I'm just trying to think on a more logical. Yeah.
Well, how I would diagram this, how I did diagram it is, you have, let me go back to this thing so I can write it. So you have sort of the do not get drunk, but be filled. I think it's by the Spirit. And then he's got these participles: speaking, singing, making melody. I'm skipping, obviously, a lot of the other phrases and clauses, but just hitting the highlights. Making melody, giving thanks. And then literally in verse 21, being subject to one another in the fear of Christ. And then he's not making a new statement where he's saying, wives, be subject here. That's how you would do it with just the New American Standard Translation. But if you take out, in the Greek, this is not there.
Yeah.
So it's got to, where am I getting the verb from?
From verse 21.
It's right there. So I think, in a sense, semantically, it's like this. Now the noun's not modifying, but I think it's borrowing the verb here. Being subject to, I think it's to one another in the fear of Christ. And then here, that being subject first, wives being subject to your own husbands, and then it says, talks about husbands love your wives, but I think it's not a separate. I think it's another way that. So that's sort of how I see it.
Yeah.
Structurally, and then you have down below, right?
Children.
Parents, or children first, right? Children obey, and then you have fathers, nurture or bring up. Then you have slaves, be subject, and there I think the verb is in verse 5. Slaves, be subject, But see, that should just tell us he's still linking to this. And then masters, grant to your slave justice. Okay, so that's kind of how I see it. And then verse 10, He says, finally, be strong in the Lord. And then he goes into the armor.
Yeah.
Oops. Being subject to one another in the farts. No, it's hearts. Sorry about that. Don't
That
preach
didn't
that
sound
one.
good.
Be subject in the farts to one another. Let me hear an amen. You know, no, that's not what I'm talking about, brother. All right. It's getting late for me here. And this
Wow.
is
Okay.
this takes us back to, remember, the whole discussion about literary context, about author's
Right.
flow of thought, that we really do need to see how these things flow
Right.
together. We can't just take, when you're preaching through the book, you can't just take, all right, this week we're going to talk about wives and husbands, and then husbands to wives, and then children. And, we break it up in these little sections in order to teach them, because you can't teach the whole thing in an hour. But sometimes by doing that, we tend to forget where it fits in the overall flow. And
Good
so
point.
that's why I put so much emphasis on those first few steps of, read and observe, of background context, and then literary context. That is the contextual flow, the author's flow of thought. I put emphasis there because that is what, like the power here of, like you said, Robbie, you brought up a great point. How in the world can we love our wives like this? Or how could we respect our husbands? It's impossible. It's hard for Christians, let alone if you're non-believers. So, but Paul has already given the resources. He's already described in chapters 1 to 3, God's work in our salvation. And then here in chapter 5, this being filled by the Spirit, and even grammatically, we can see how it links together. I think, based on this structure, that, these 5 participles are the result of being filled by the Spirit. Some say it's the means, like by speaking and, singing, making melody, giving thanks, that's how we are filled by the Spirit. I don't see that.
No,
I think it's
I don't see that.
it's the result
Yeah.
because here's the command. These participles, I think, tell us what the fruit of that, or what that brings. And so,
I think what usually throws us off initially, if we are not deliberate in doing what you've just instructed us to do, I think it's so easy to be thrown off by the chapter divisions in the Bible. So you begin to see, oh, it's chapter 5, so it's almost maybe in the backs of our minds, this is a different topic now. So it's a great reminder to just look at the flow, even from the chapter before or the passages before.
Yeah, and I think with Ephesians, it to me, the structure, we all know about the structure. We have chapters 1 to 3.
Yeah.
Right. Focuses on the work of God in salvation. Right. And then chapters 4 to 6 are the response to God's work in salvation. Right. I urge you to walk in a manner worthy of your calling, or how did he? He says a similar thing. So many. Implore you, walk in a manner worthy of the calling. So 4 to 6 is the response, and then if we remember how it's broken up, 4:1 to 16 is walk in unity. That's how it's framed. Then 4:17 to 24 is walk not like the Gentiles. Or we could put it in the positive, walk in holiness. He didn't say it that way. He said, don't walk like the Gentiles. But 4:25 to 5:2 is walk in love. 5:3 to 5:14 is walk in the light.
Mm-mm.
And then 5:15 all the way to 6:9 is walk in wisdom. Okay. How do we do that? Know the will of God, he says, and he says, be filled by the Spirit. All right. Then we have in verse 6 and 6:10, he doesn't use the walk command. He says stand. Stand in, stand firm. I'll just put it this way, in God's armor. That's the summary of the section. All right. So, I mean, so here, walk in wisdom, this is where we've got our household code, right? 5:22. So then it breaks down by these, these here. You've got 5:15 to 18, and then underneath that you have 5:19 to 21, and then underneath that you have 5:22 to 6:9. Okay, there's your structure. So I think this is important. This isn't just an academic exercise to figure out the outline,
right?
The outline of Ephesians. It actually matters because when you know where your verse or verses fit in the bigger picture, that helps give clarity to not only what the meaning of the text is, but in this case, if we know, what, men, how do you love your wives in this way? How in the world could we love as Christ loved? Well, we need God's help, not only to save us, but also the work of the Spirit to empower us. That's what Paul introduced this whole section with that. And so, so that adds to, that's such an important and powerful truth. And it's not one we have to make up or go to other scriptures to try to add to. It's there in the text already. Any other thoughts, guys, or questions, comments?
I don't remember who the author was, but early on, when I first looked at the book of Ephesians, this is many years ago, I just remembered how one author divided it in 3 words: sit, walk, and stand, where sit is not really so much as a command, because in the first 3 chapters, it was really to remember, right? In chapter 2, verse 12, that's the only command in the first 3 chapters. But he summarized it simply as saying, just remember 3 words: sit, and then walk, and then stand. And so basically that's how I had treated that. Of course, not in the way that you're showing this, not as fine as the way that you're showing this now, connecting everything like this.
Yeah, I think that's a great little sit, walk, and stand. Even more reflect, walk, and stand. But sit, walk, and stand is a nice, memorable way to kind of grab that that general idea. That's good. All right. Well, we're talking about Ephesians 6. Why don't we just do one more example from there, and then we will rest ourselves. So let's go to, unless there's any other thoughts or questions here, I don't want to. I think we're good? Okay. All right. Who am I going to pick on? I mean, who's next here? I think Brother Gary, are you listening in?
Yes, Pastor.
Why don't you give a try on this Ephesians 6 here? Just identify anytime we see the preposition to, just identify, is it a prepositional phrase or is it an infinitive?
Okay. In to me, on verse 19.
Okay. Verse 19. To me. Prepositional phrase or infinitive?
Prepositional phrase.
Why is that? How do we know?
Because of the word me is a noun.
Yes. So, all right, good. So we'll just move on from there. What's the next one?
To make known.
Yes. And what is that?
That's
infinitive or phrase?
infinitive.
Okay. How do we know?
The word make is verb.
Yeah. Make known. Yeah. It's a verb. Okay. What do you think it's modifying, or how is it functioning in this sentence here?
It's modifying the word opening of my mouth.
All right. Well, let's simplify things by, let's just take this sentence here.
Okay.
All right. Pray. So we'll just kind of try to identify, is there a subject, verb?
The subject is my.
Okay, my. So if I say subject, my. But is that what's doing the action? What is the action here? Maybe we can start with the verb. Sometimes that helps. What looks like the main? What looks to be the main verb here?
Pray.
Yeah. So who's doing that action? Is he saying my pray?
No. And subject is
What kind of verb is this? Is this, remember we talked about in the past, the mood? Is this indicative, imperative? Is it a question? Is it, which one of these is it, you think? He's saying pray.
is it imperative?
Yeah. It's a little tricky, huh? The subject is hidden, isn't it? It's implied.
Yes.
What's the subject? Knowing that this is an imperative, what's the subject?
Is it the
It's all right. Take a guess.
Is it the one who were asked to pray?
Yeah, and who's he speaking to? Like, who is he asking to pray for on his behalf?
The Ephesians.
Yeah, and so
believers.
the implied pronoun is you, right?
Yes.
You pray on my behalf.
Yeah.
Okay. So you pray on my behalf, and then notice he says that. That's the content of the prayer, right?
Yeah.
So you pray that utterance may be given. Okay?
Yeah.
To me, in the opening of my mouth, when to make known. So if we were to, maybe we can do it this way. So you, we'll just, you pray. And then on my behalf would be how, and then that. So the content of the prayer. Renee's drawing all over my. What are you doing there, Pastor Renee? Making a mess. Okay. Pray that. That's the object of the prayer. Utterance may be given. Where? To me. I'm nuts. Okay, let me just put this down and then we'll talk about where, when, in the opening my mouth. Okay. And then to make known. So here's my infinitive. Where do you think it goes?
The utterance.
Pardon?
That utterance.
Utterance? Is that what you said? I didn't hear you.
Or,
Yes,
yeah,
that's what he
utterance.
said.
Okay, sorry. That's one possibility. Utterance to make known. That would be like what
opening.
kind of utterance, but is there another option?
Or in the opening.
The
In the
opening?
opening of my mouth.
Okay. What about one thing that came to my mind was it could be modifying may be given to make known, and that's the result.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So there's a couple options. I think to make known probably makes more sense as modifying maybe given, because it's describing what happens, what results. Utterance may be given, resulting in making known, or to make known.
Okay.
Okay. To make known the mystery of the gospel. But okay, so yeah, this was I'm asking you guys to do something. This is challenging because I'm asking you to take a infinitive in the middle of the paragraph and try to figure out where it goes. So don't feel bad if you're not seeing it clearly right away. All right. The main thing I'm wanting to see is that you guys can identify the infinitives. How they fit is more that's sort of a bonus question I'm asking you. So let's go back to the passage here. Do you see another?
Yeah, in verse 20, for which I am ambassador in chains, that in proclaiming that I may speak boldly, so that I ought to speak.
There you go. Is that an infinitive or a?
Yeah, it's an infinitive.
Good, because speak is a verb, so you're right.
Yeah.
Okay, and here we're back with that as I ought. So I think here to speak is the object of ought.
Yep.
I ought to speak. Okay. Any more?
In verse 21.
21.
But that you also may know about my circumstances, how I'm doing. Tychicus, and beloved brother and faithful minister in the Lord, will make everything known to you.
There we go. To you. Prepositional phrase or infinitive?
Yeah, it's a prepositional phrase
Good.
because word the pronoun.
Yes. Very good.
Yeah.
All right. And then it looks like there's one more
Hmm.
in verse 22, right?
Yeah, I have sent him to you.
Yeah, same thing, to you. Okay. All right. So here we've got two infinitives, and let's go in our final thing we'll do today is let's go and look at the interlinear and see what where'd it go? Oh, here it is. Okay. Let's pull up Ephesians 6. Okay. Ephesians 6, verse 19. Okay. So then I'm going to look verse 19. Also for me, in order that to me may be given divine utterance in the opening, the mouth of me in boldness. And then here's the word to make known. So I'm going to look down here. All right, Gary, what does it tell us? What kind of verb is, or what kind of an infinitive?
Infinitive active.
Yes. So to make known is an infinitive. All right. And then let's go to the next infinitive that the translation was I ought to speak. So let's find to speak. I may be bold to speak. All right. And what does that say?
Infinitive active.
Okay. So the NAS translated those as infinitives, and they are infinitives. So we confirm that. All right. Okay. Well, I made you guys suffer enough today, so we'll stop here. All right, good. And we'll a thing I really want you to sort of grab from this is, you know, as we go through things, you know, when we're doing diagramming, it's all about what modifies what. How does this phrase or clause, what is it connected to? And so I really want you, I brought up infinitives, not only just because they occur in the Bible, but, and by the way, there are Hebrew infinitives as well. There's infinitives in Hebrew as well. Is that it all comes back to these four basic building blocks of grammar. Okay. It's going to come back to this over and over and over again. Essentially, there are four fundamental parts of speech. Now, there's a couple more conjunctions. You know, there's, but really, when it all comes down to it, you've got, you know, every word or phrase functions in one of four ways, like a noun, a verb, an adjective, or an adverb. Okay, that's an oversimplification, but I think it captures a lot. And so when we think about this, what we're interested in at a diagram is modifiers. And remember, nouns do not modify. Verbs do not modify. Adjectives modify nouns. Okay, we're back to what I said at the very beginning. Adverbs modify verbs. Now, it's important then, as you are looking at these other components, you know, we have participles, we have infinitives, okay, prepositional phrases. And we want to know, okay, how do they behave? Well, participles can behave like adjectives or adverbs. That means they modify. Like we just saw in Ephesians 5, those 5 participles modified, filled. Okay, that's important that we see that, because that's telling us how Paul is what are you saying? Infinitives. Now, infinitives can also function like adjectives or adverbs, but here's the thing. You want to know if it's an infinitive because sometimes they function as nouns. And again, nouns do not modify. So that's why this is important. Prep phrases, they function as adjectives or adverbs. So they modify. And participles function as adjectives or adverbs, so they modify. Now, there's one other category that we'll cover when we talk about participles, gerunds. Gerunds function like nouns, so therefore they do not modify. Okay, so this becomes important. If you can identify what it is, it's an infinitive. Infinitives. They can modify and sometimes they can't. So I need to figure out, is this infinitive here a noun or not? If it's not acting like a noun, then it does modify something. But the infinitive does not always modify. Sometimes it's an object or a subject of a sentence. All right. And so, conjunctions, we know those don't modify. Well, I stand corrected. The coordinating conjunctions, they don't modify, but subordinating ones do. Because remember, a subordinating conjunction introduces a dependent clause. And a dependent clause, by definition, depends on something else. It modifies something else. All right. So each of these connector words is important because it tells us, okay, if I have a prep phrase, well, I know it modifies something because prep phrases act like adjectives or adverbs. If I have a participle, that's a connector word. It also acts like an adjective or an adverb, so it too modifies. But if I have a coordinating conjunction, then I know what follows it does not modify something else. All right? And so, as painful as it is going through all these things, really, as we can classify in our minds what we're dealing with, then we know how they function. So an infinitive, like I said, could or could not modify. And so we have to figure out, how is that infinitive working in the sentence? Because if we just say, I see the word to, well, to is a preposition. Therefore, it's a prepositional phrase. Then you're going to say, well, that always will modify something. But if it's not a prepositional phrase, it's an infinitive, and not all infinitives modify something. Sometimes they are, like I said, function as a noun. So noun, verb, adjective, adverb. Those are the basic building blocks of phrases and clauses. Those clauses are connected together in some way in phrases. Those form sentences. Sentences form paragraphs. Paragraphs tell us the author's flow of thought. Okay. All right. Well, that's any comments or questions on this? My hope is that once we, get through participles, the relative pronouns, and so we come back, you know where we're headed. We're looking for these phrases and clauses and how they connect, but I'm trying to equip you to everything we're going to encounter, you'll be familiar with, hopefully, when we get to, because there's a lot of stuff when we went through it in class that we didn't cover, and I sort of skipped over, or I wasn't precise in how we identified certain phrases and clauses because we just didn't have time to do all of this, so my hope is just to try to, now I'm just equipping you with more tools. I hope that you can now tackle more things as you look at these passages, and you have these handouts. So if you get to a place, I don't know how to simply summarize a lot of this, but I'm going to try to think of some ways to do that. But, I want you to be able to be comfortable when you see things, at least you've been exposed to it, and then you can hopefully, be more able to tackle it. But the interlinear, as I think you guys are finding out, and the use of other translations is an important tool for us. Okay. Well, thank you for your patience, diligence, guys. I know this is not an easy topics, but we'll keep forging ahead. So next week is the prepositional verb. That's where it really gets fun. And actually, guys, to be honest, I didn't know much about them until doing this with you guys, because there were some verbs I didn't know what to do with. I wasn't sure what they were. And in preparing for these studies, it's like, oh, that makes sense. Because I encountered sometimes verbs that had prepositions in them that I didn't know what to do with. But now I think I do. So I'm learning stuff too as we go along here. So I don't know if that comforts you or it makes you wonder. Does this guy even know what he's talking about? So, okay.